Welcome to Dynasty Life. Redraft ends, but Dynasty is life. I'm Theo Greminger, bringing you shows like this every single week, right up until the NFL draft, and then right afterwards, getting you ready for all of your rookie drafts, all of your offseason Dynasty content. And I want to bring in the sharpest guest possible to evaluate this 2025 class. A number of you have seen Garret Price on this show several times before, recurring guest at this point. Garret crushes it over at Dynasty Nerds. We're going to dive into it today. We're going to reveal our top 5 players at each and every position in the 2025 class. Garret, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. That was a very kind intro. I appreciate it. But yeah, man, I'm doing well. Ohio State just won the national championship, so flying pretty high today. Can't lie. So yeah, I'm doing well, my guy.
Yeah, so this is one which was really fun for me this year. My son last year sort of started getting into college football a little bit. He was 6 years old. He wanted to watch like Alabama, Michigan. We watched the national title game and a couple of games leading up, and he started getting into it this year with like the bracket. I feel like this was very kid friendly. Kids love brackets, looking at tournaments. Very cool to kind of see the future, give your predictions. So we've been on sort of on your Buckeyes a little bit. I know the two of us talked a couple weeks ago briefly, wished you good luck. And this was like a steamrolling. And we're going to talk a lot about these Buckeyes because would you agree that this is going to be the most drafted team out of college this year in terms of sheer numbers of players entering the NFL this year? We're going to see Buckeyes called, hear their names called pretty much every single round. Multiple Buckeyes are going to go off the board.
Yeah, whether you're talking real life or fantasy, either way, there's going to be a lot of Ohio State Buckeyes. There's a lot of good players on that defense that'll end up being drafted. But even for fantasy football, there's easy 3 guys to 4 guys that you're going to see fairly high in your fantasy drafts. So it's going to be a fun time period to kind of take a look at all of these different guys. And you have this every year. You have certain teams that tend to dominate the NFL draft just from the sheer number of players that they have. And we had a lot of guys go back last season, decide to go one more year. Guys like TreVeyon could have easily come out last year. Emeka Egbuka could have easily come out last year. Wanted to go back for one more season, and that kind of helps boost that class a little bit.
Yeah, I had TreVeyon Henderson as one of my highest ranked running backs when we first started doing this last year in the 2024 class, thinking he was going to come out. And I had Egbuka as a guy that we would be drafting towards the end of like the first round in single QB leagues. Very excited about him. I'm still excited about him, but it's sort of nowadays we're looking at guys who are going back to school. This is the power of the NIL. Guys are staying longer. Guys are transferring more often. I think it makes our evaluative process more fun because you have more situations. You're able to kind of balance things out. Do you sort of agree with that things have sort of shifted? We could start out wide receiver. Years ago, we would kind of hold it against guys if they were 4-year players. Chris Olave sort of was like yeah, we like him, but he's a 4-year guy. Now you don't hear that anymore because guys go back to school.
Yeah, and I remember, it's funny how things change and shift, and we always want to find different metrics and things like that. Like a big one 4 or 5 years ago, Rich and I were talking about it the other day, was like breakout age. Breakout age was huge. If you didn't have a good breakout age, we weren't interested in you. And then there were a lot of guys that kind of broke that mold, and all of a sudden we don't really talk about breakout age nearly as much anymore as we used to. And there's different things like that. But yes, going back to school for a 4th year at wide receiver or running back or quarterback, or it really doesn't affect too much. Yes, we love them coming out earlier. That means we get them on our fantasy football teams longer. So we're not upset when they do, but it's not the death penalty that it almost seemed to be at one point.
Yeah, and almost with quarterback, it's almost like we want to try to avoid the guys with very few college starts that are a little more raw just because we've been burned for several times over, with Trey Lance, and then not necessarily completely burned, but we're not where we want to be with Anthony Richardson at this point, to say the least. So I think guys, we saw last year with like Jaden Daniels, Bo Nix, these guys have so many college starts this year as well. The 2 quarterbacks that we have ranked 1 and 2 in the class, Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders, are both transfers, both guys that played have a ton of starts under their belt which I think you know a little bit more about them as prospects. So very exciting stuff. Let's take a step back. I want to ask every guest two questions. Just how excited are you about this draft class? Last year, we had such a successful rookie class, a class we expected to be very good, and it was great. 2023, we were excited about it, and I think that class has sort of exceeded expectations for us in terms of their impact on fantasy football. Where are you at on 2025 collectively?
Overall, we have another very good class coming in. The biggest question mark of this class is going to be that quarterback position. I think that's the one that we're really going to have to kind of watch and see how this plays out. Last year we had 6 guys go in the first round. We're not going to have that type of situation this year. We're looking at we know 2 guys are going to be top 5 picks. We feel very confident in that. But outside of that, 1, maybe 2 more guys. And I don't know that anybody can say definitively that they know even which 2 guys those will be. So it's a very up in the air class. And even with guys like Shador and Ward, as much as I do like those players, they're not on the level of Kaleb and Daniels and May, where they were at last year, where people were like, these are legitimate NFL prospects. We think these guys can be superstars in the league. It's like, hey, these guys have a lot of good traits and there's a lot of things I like, but these are not the borderline can't miss guys that we had last year. So I think that's the biggest question mark for this class. But something that this class has that last year's class really didn't is the running backs. We have a lot more running backs and a lot more at the top that last year's class just didn't really have. So I think that's kind of the balance of these 2 classes. Another class where we're going to have some exciting tight ends come out in this class. I don't know that anyone's going to put up Brock Bowers numbers, but we have some very good tight ends in this class. And then receiver is an interesting one in this year's class. I don't know that we have as many, similar to the quarterbacks, I don't know that we have as many can't miss guys towards the top that we had last year, but there are a lot of very good prospects that are going to help NFL teams.
Yeah, and that's the thing with receiver right now is I feel like receivers almost become underrated because people want to beat it up relative to uh, years past. But one thing the NFL has sort of proven for the last few years is the willingness to embrace rookies at the wide receiver spot. We see these teams evaluate these guys, draft these guys, use these guys right away. And this is by no means a bad wide receiver class. We just don't necessarily expect there to be a Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas, guys finishing top 5 in wide receiver overall scoring. But let's galaxy brain this one a little bit. We've now had 4 out of the last 5 years where a rookie has finished top 6 in PPR scoring at the wide receiver position right away. Puka Nacua, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, and then this past year with Thomas and Neighbors. If there is a player in this draft class who's going to give us that sort of scoring at the wide receiver position, who would it be? And on what team, Garrett? What's like your ideal landing spot / player situation where you're like, wheels up, let's go?
So the natural answer is Tet McMillan. He's got a lot of the things that you would really, really like. The tricky part is he's probably going to go to a lower tier team. I think most people expect him to be a top 15 pick in this year's draft. So is he going to have the quarterback play that is going to be needed to be that type of player? Now, maybe he goes to New England and he's the only show in town and, him and Drake May make magic. It's definitely a possibility. So if I had to place a bet, it would probably be Tet McMillan, but I would be very interested in guys like Luther Burden, Emeka Ibuka, some guys like that, Golden, some players that might be going toward the end of the first round. And, what happens if, let's say, one of these guys ends up in Washington with Jaden Daniels? That's a very enticing landing spot for one of these receivers. So I think if I had to pick a player, it would probably be Tet McMillan, but I would say the odds are just as good if we get one of these, other guys that go to a really good landing spot with a really good quarterback towards the end of the draft. And then we see, did somebody join Josh Allen and now they're the guy? Did somebody join Jaden Daniels and now they're the guy? So I think that's just as likely as a big name guy like Tet towards the top.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I think that the answer Cody Carpentier came up with was Ted McMillan landing in New England and just, alphaing his way to like 145, 150 targets. But I do like what you're bringing up with a guy like Igbuka, where a big power slot lands correctly, and all of a sudden he becomes a target magnet sort of out the gate. That's also an enticing one. And maybe he lands with a better offense. So I like that one. I think that's a little bit more nuanced way to approach that question. And I'm going to sort of ask everybody that question. I think I'm going to get a lot of Ted McMillan answers there, though, Garret. Garret, let's keep this going. Who would be a player that maybe you're a little bit higher on than others in this draft class for fantasy football?
Yeah, so we're doing a lot of digging. We're looking into a lot of these players, and I still have so much work to do on this class. But right now, I know that there's a lot of people that are. I think the running back class is really interesting after Ashton Genty. Like, if somebody's telling you that Ashton Genty isn't the one, I'd be really curious as to how they came to that conclusion, because he just looks like, I mean, I've already done my score for him over the past 6 years. The only running back to have a higher tape score for me was Bijan, and it was very, very close between the two. So, I mean, he's one of the best backs we've had in the past decade come out of the draft. That being said, I think the 2 through 6 or 7 are going to be really interesting how these players are ranked and viewed and things like that. So for me, a guy that I actually have at the moment at 2, that I know that there's other people that'll have him maybe 4, 5, 6, is TreVeyon Henderson. And for a while, I put this guy, and I try to put Ohio State guys lower at first until I really dig into their tape, because I know what I saw on Saturdays and when I watch these guys, but I don't want to give them the benefit of the doubt until I've really dug into the class. But watching TreVeyon Henderson, he does a lot of things really, really well. The way I kind of look at him is, if you were to take Kyron Williams and you were to take Chase Brown and you were to put their best qualities together, that's kind of what you get in a TreVeyon Henderson. Is he a big dude? No, neither one of those guys are very big dudes. TreVeyon's not big. He'll probably come in at 200, 205 would be my guess. So he's not going to be the biggest back ever, but he's an incredible pass protector. Like, very, very good in pass protection, which shows his lower body strength, because you see him be able to roll those hips and really get a good punch. So he has good lower body strength. He's got the long speed that you want, the guys that can just break off a 70, 80-yard play at any point. TreVeyon Henderson's that guy. He's good in the receiving game, so he's going to be out there to catch some passes. Like I said, I know he's going to be on there on third down because of his pass protection as well. So more opportunities on the field. And then as a runner, like, I think he's an underrated runner as well. He's not going to be this physical bruising back that's going to run you over, but he has solid contact balance, and he does a great job in the backfield at making guys miss. When you talk about a player, his elusiveness, on the surface, you're not going to be like, oh, TreVeyon Henderson's one of the most elusive players, but he's very, very smart with how he plays the game. He's not going to string together 4 and 5 make you miss kind of moves, because what happens typically there is that gives more time for the defense to close in and make a play. So he's going to get one guy to miss in the backfield. Then he's going to find the hole, get upfield, one cut, hit the hole, and go. He can make a lot of guys miss, but he uses those make you miss moves, the spins, the dead legs, the things like that. He uses those very, very wisely, and he uses them at the right time, because at the end of the day, he's trying to make the best play, not necessarily the highlight play. And so I really like his overall game. And I think for how the NFL is going, when you see guys like Kyron Williams, like Chase Brown, like Jahmyr Gibbs, like Devon Achane, that are smaller running backs, but still getting these featured roles between running and passing, I think TreVeyon Henderson's a great fit for what the NFL is doing right now with those types of players.
Yeah, I love that. And I certainly have him ranked highly. I don't have him as highly as you do, but I think that another thing you said is just the relative strength to this running back position. I think a lot of times you're going to see people, whether you're following Garret, whether you're following myself, we're recording this in January. I think the end of February and then getting into the NFL Combine, rankings are going to shift a little bit this year just because
Absolutely.
it's so difficult. And anybody who has the same rankings on like Christmas Day and then NFL Draft Day is probably not paying attention to all the great information we're getting. So TreVeyon Henderson, definitely an interesting one. Is there a player who maybe you're a little bit lower on than others, Garret?
Yeah, we're going to stick at the same position. And I don't want to make it sound like I don't like this player, because my nerd score for him is a solid score. So I don't want to sound like I don't like this player, but I'm not as high on Kaleb Johnson as maybe some other people are in this class. Kind of flip it. I think there's a lot of people that would consider putting Kaleb at 2, where I have TreVeyon at 2. And there's other people that would put TreVeyon at 5, where I have Kaleb at 5. So I kind of have that a little bit flipped compared to maybe what sort of consensus is right now. And I've seen a lot of guys at RB2. I've seen Omarion Hampton there. I've seen Judkins there. I've seen a lot of different players that could be in that spot. But for me right now, Kaleb Johnson, the biggest thing for me is I don't know that the juice is there. I don't know that he has the quickness, the long speed, that burst that you get out of the box. He doesn't have as much of that. Does he have good contact balance? Yes. Does he catch the ball real well? Yes. So there's still a lot of things in his game to like, but that ability to make a guy miss, that ability to really set up the defender. And then you look at what his offensive line did. His offensive line was pretty darn good. They made some really, really big holes for him. Now, he shouldn't be punished for having a good offensive line. So I'm not saying that as a negative thing, but what I'm saying is I think his numbers got a little bit inflated because of the volume that he got, but then specifically how good that offensive line was. He didn't have to deal with guys in the backfield very often. He got to get ahead of steam and get things moving down the field. Whereas I think you're not going to get quite as much of that at the NFL level unless you're fortunate enough to get drafted by a team that has a really, really good offensive line.
Yeah, I get it. And I have Kaleb ranked higher than you do. I think that he's a guy that I'm projecting to get a ton of volume in the NFL. But I do agree that there might be a certain level for him where maybe he ends up being a David Montgomery type, which is fine, but it's not necessarily like when we look at Genty, it's a break fantasy, a guy we're taking potentially at the 101 in redraft. But these guys like Kaleb Johnson, who can handle the volume, they can get to the next level. They can potentially be a useful receiver. I think another thing about Kaleb taking that step this year, 22 receptions at Iowa, not exactly a program that's passing the ball a whole lot to their back. So Caleb's one that's interesting. I'll be interested to see his 40, but I do think he's every bit 220. He's got that prototypical size, so we will sort of go back and forth on that one. How about a sleeper? Is there a sleeper player that, and you could take sleeper any way you want, could be a guy that's just a little bit that basically you think that people are going to be talking about a little bit more, whether it's after Mobile at the Senior Bowl, whether it's at the NFL Combine, a guy that's sort of a Garret Price sleeper pick.
Yeah, this would have sounded hilarious to call this guy a sleeper last season. It would have been one of those situations like, do you know what that term means? But I think he's become kind of this post-hype sleeper type, and that guy's Ollie Gordon. He had an incredible year in 2023. Won the Doak Walker Award, 1,700 rushing yards, did a lot through the air as well. And then things just came crashing down, plummeting down for him this year. And you look at a lot of lists, like right now I'm looking at ESPN's. They have him ranked as the 11th running back in the class. I see a lot where he's in the double digits. He's not really in that top 8 type of consideration. And I think the hate has gone a little bit too far. Watching his tape, there's actually a lot of things to really like. He kind of has the opposite effect of what happened with Kaleb Johnson, where his offensive line this year was really bad. It was a really poor offensive line, and there were a lot of things that he had to do on his own. That being said, I think he's got better feet than I expected him to have as a big guy. He's got pretty good long speed, and I think he's got that boom, that power that you would want. Kind of reminds me of, and depending on how you feel about this player, people won't take it as a good thing. I'm saying this is a good thing from what I saw with his time as the Jets, but he kind of reminds me of Braylon Allen a little bit, a bigger, more physical player, but has pretty good feet in the hole as well. So I think if he gets, round 3 draft capital, which is kind of where I'm expecting him to go, is probably in round 3 of the NFL draft. I think he's a player that could do a lot more than maybe people are giving him credit for at this point.
Yeah, and Cody Carpentier also had that same pick where he's higher on Ollie Gordon relative to a lot of people's rankings right now. Gordon certainly was a guy where if we were doing this a year ago, Garrett, we both would have circled Gordon as a guy that would have been like a top 5 rookie pick for us. Now it's looking like a guy that's going to slip. For me, I actually have made that same Braylon Allen type comparison where he's Braylon Allen combine size, where, he's a big, tall back. He's got the size. He had that massive season at Oklahoma State. Even this past year gets 13 rushing scores in a terrible situation. So he's one where I think we're recording this before the Senior Bowl. We're really looking for him to have a strong Senior Bowl. We're looking for him to get that NFL draft capital. For some guys, we'd say, hey, this guy slipped into the 4th, 5th round, but we still really like the profile. I think if the NFL lets this guy slip, it's for a reason, and we should pay attention to that as much as any. For me, my sleeper pick, a guy that I think is going to have a very good Senior Bowl, and one that I think I'm going to be higher on than consensus, Damian Martinez, also giving you a lot with he's 225, 230, 6 feet tall. He's been a back that's excelled at multiple schools, had 180 rushing yards in Miami's bowl game against Iowa State. Just a really big, explosive back. This is a guy where I think he's going to end up getting that day 2 draft capital at the end of the day. And I think it's been one of those guys where people are going to have to adjust their rankings down the line. I think he's also 20 years old, which is not like hey, we love these running backs because they're young, but it's a positive as well. This guy broke out early. He's going to continue breaking out. Averaged over 6.6 yards per carry every season in college. Damian Martinez is a name that I'm circling. Any initial thoughts on Martinez?
Yeah, so it's funny because I actually have him queued up to watch today. So
Enjoy.
I've watched highlights. I've watched, I've watched a game on him, but I have him, I don't really like to make strong definitive statements until I've seen at least 4 games from a player. So I can't say anything, very definitively, but the little bit I've seen, I really like Martinez. And I could see him being a guy where I would be on that train with you to say, hey, this is an undervalued player. He's got the prototypical size. He does a lot of things well, and we should be considering him a little bit higher in this draft class.
Yeah, and I think we'll know a little bit more about these guys after Mobile, because there's a bunch of these running backs that are sort of in that, not necessarily in our top 5, but in that next tier. Guys could break in, we're going to see Devin Neal. We're going to see Martinez. Ollie Gordon's going to be there. So this is going to be an interesting one. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, Garrett and I are going to reveal our top 5 at each position.
Oh, I see all this mock draft information out there. Oh, this mock, that mock. Hey, what about a real actual fantasy game? The Flex 4 game on Fast Draft, draftfaster.com, is open. You draft 6 running backs, wide receivers, tight ends. The top 4 enter your lineup every week. It's that easy. It's that simple. Drafts take 5 minutes. There's a $50,000 prize pool. It's $15,000 to first. It's just a $5 entry. And the best part, no rake. No rake whatsoever on Fast Draft, the first 2025 Best Ball contest to open in the world, is ready for you to draft up to 150 teams. Draftfaster.com, draftfaster.com. Start playing Best Ball for real.
Welcome back to Dynasty Life. Theo Greminger with Garret Price of Dynasty Nerds. Garrett, let's start out quarterback position. Not a position we're head over heels with, but there are a few players in here that are going to make impacts for us, certainly in our Superflex Dynasty formats.
Yeah. It's an interesting class. We talked about it a little bit earlier, but for me right now, when I'm looking at my top 5, there's Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders, and that's why I have 1 and 2. And then I think there's a pretty big tier gap for me because after that, and at the quarterback position in general, that's the one probably of all the positions. That's the one that I really like the NFL draft to tell me how they feel about a player more so than any other position. Because this is something where at the quarterback spot, there is so much going on between the ears that we are just not privy to. We don't get to interview these guys. We don't get to sit down with them and talk with them the way that these GMs and these scouts and these head coaches get to do. We don't know a lot of this kind of stuff. And if there's a position that is more mental on the field, it's quarterback position. Running backs, look, I played running back. I get it, but they can get away with being just okay mentally, but having elite physical skills. Wide receivers, tight ends, quarterbacks, you can't get away with that. You can't get away just out-athleting people. They have to be sharp mentally, and that's not just necessarily intelligence, but also confidence, the ability to kind of turn the page on the next play. So I let the NFL draft give me a little bit of that more so than I do other positions. But for me right now, it would be Cam Ward, then it would be Shedeur Sanders. Big gap. I'm probably going to go with Milroe at 3 just because of the absurd upside that he has as a runner, but it terrifies me. It terrifies me at this point. And if he doesn't get first-round draft capital, that's going to hurt. At 4, I'm probably going to go with Quinn Ewers. And then at 5, we talked about it before. I'm kind of cheating a little bit at 5 because throw whoever you want in there at this point for me. You want to throw McCord, you want to throw Dart, you want to throw whoever. And we even touched on Will Howard, and I'll let you get into him a little bit more, despite being a Buckeyes fan. But 5 right now for me is just flip a coin, and whoever you say, I'll probably be like, yeah, I'm good with that.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting one. For me, I had Sanders as the QB1 in the class, but I'm going to adjust and actually go with Cam Ward because I think he's going to get the insulation of being the 101 in the NFL draft, and I think he has a little bit more potential for mobility. I think both of these guys are a little bit underrated. I know there's sort of a lot of like, let's pile on Shedeur Sanders, but Shedeur Sanders makes everything single throw. Both of these guys are very strong arm guys with accuracy. Mm-hmm. Cam Ward has a little bit more mobility, which sort of leans him in there. But for me, like Shedeur Sanders, people love NFL comps, and I think I'm okay with them. But I think some people weigh these a little bit more heavily than I would. I love how you give traits of multiple players, Garrett, instead of like pigeonholing that this is the next blank. But when you see Shedeur Sanders, I think like the floor is going to be like a Geno Smith. I think he's got that Geno or better outcome, which I think is good. If you look at where Geno's finished for his quarterback rankings in PPR, not a guy who's going to give us like top 5 production at the position, but there's only a few of those guys every single year. So for me, those 2 guys at the top, QB3 for me, a guy that I think is going to gain value in Mobile, Jackson Dart. And I think if one of these guys that's Milroe can go early in the NFL draft if someone falls in love with him as a runner. I know that every couple of days we get some rumor that XYZ team loves Milroe. Now today there's like Steelers love Milroe. Yeah. They'll consider taking it. I don't know if I necessarily buy that this early, but there is some smoke screens there. But for me, Dart, he's got the big arm. He's got the moxie. He's 220. I know that the Ole Miss system, it's like a difficult one to evaluate quarterbacks. Quarterbacks are difficult to evaluate in any system, but I know the Ole Miss system, like there's been guys we thought would have come out of that school and maybe they didn't really do anything as a pro. But for me, Dart kind of has that it factor. If there's a guy that I think propels himself into the first round out of this like QB3 or below, I would bet on Dart. And then QB5, I mean, I know that you Buckeye fans want to be like, you know, hey, this is a guy that we don't want to get too excited about. But when I look at Will Howard, this is a guy that has mobility. He has pro size. He's made really, really big plays in the playoffs. And I know that a lot of people will point out and say, look at the guys he has surrounding him on offense. Look at the quality of the team itself. All he had to do was sort of like show up on campus and they're going to win the national title. But this is a guy that we also saw get better and better and better. He was a 70+% completion percentage this year. This was a guy that has the mobility. And again, I like his size. And I think a team's going to look at him. The value of drafting a guy like him as your QB2, with the potential to end up being an NFL starter, I think more and more teams are going to value having a strong QB2 after what we saw this past year with the downgrade that you see. Like, you go into the season and you're seeing teams where starter goes down, QB2 is just horrendous. They're signing guys off the street to make up for their mistakes. Two is a great example of this one, just the train wreck of an offense they were. So with me, when I see Howard's a guy where I think an NFL team's going to say, I can use this guy as a backup quarterback right away, and there's potential that he can win out on a committee and be a starter for us. I also think that it's a positive that we saw him succeed at two separate schools, wins a Big 12 championship at Kansas State, and goes to Ohio State and wins a national title. This guy's a winner. He's got size. He's got mobility. Embrace him.
Yeah, no, I love it. And he's one that has really, he's done a lot for himself with this playoff, because the Oregon game during the regular season and then the Michigan game to end the year really kind of put a sour taste in your mouth. And yes, you can point to a lot of different things, but he did not play his best football in those games. And you're saying, man, maybe the Big Ten was just a little too big. Maybe these big time games, these big time throws, he just wasn't able to do it when the lights were the brightest. So then for him to be able to come in, and Ohio State ended up beating, I want to say it was like 6 of the top 10 AP teams total this year. Like, that's really, really difficult to do over the course of the year. They ended up beating Tennessee in the playoffs, then beat Oregon, who was the only undefeated team in football and the team that beat them during the regular season. Then you go and you beat a Texas team, which, some argue that might have even been the real national championship game before you got to the national championship. Then they beat Notre Dame and their good defense. So he did a lot to help himself. And you're right, he made every throw that you would want him to make in those playoffs, then showed that mobility as well, which is, a valuable thing to NFL teams. Is he going to be running like Lamar or any of those guys? No, but more similar to a Justin Herbert, where, hey, is he going to get you maybe 400 yards a season fantasy wise? I think that's in the realm of possibility.
Yep. I that's also a guy that's going to be in Mobile. Let's see how he does at the Senior Bowl, but I think there's some steam with him. People love seeing winning quarterbacks, and they want to embrace this profile. Let's pivot over to the running back position. This is the position where both of us think is the most impactful for fantasy football. How are you ranking these players, Garrett?
Yep, I said it before. Ashton Genty, clear in a way the running back one. There's a big gap for me. Then it goes, I can hear arguments on a lot of different players. The next two guys for me are those Ohio State running backs. And I didn't want it to be. To start the year, I had TreVeyon at 5 and Quinshon at 6. So I really did not want to just artificially elevate these Buckeye running backs. But I already talked about TreVeyon. Quinshon Judkins, I think he has a lot of the same pop and a lot of the same physicality that Hampton and Johnson and Gordon and a lot of these other players have, but I think he has more juice than those guys have. I think he's got better feet, a little bit more of that quick acceleration that those other guys don't have. So I'm going to go with Judkins at 3. Then I'm going to go with Omari and Hampton at 4. And then at 5, I have Kaleb Johnson. But there's a few guys that I really want to put in there that, it's a top 5 for a reason, so I can't. But those would be the 5 for me right now.
Give me one name where if you could make it a top 6, not to pigeonhole yourself, like the most painful guy to leave out for you was?
Probably Scattaboo.
Scattaboo. I love that.
I loved his tape. Is he going to run probably a 4.65 40? Like, it would not surprise me if he runs a 4.65. Like, he's not going to be blazing, but you watch him, he is an extremely difficult man to bring down. Catches the ball really well. Does a lot of kind of reminds me. Yeah, I don't want to get too deep into the comps right now.
No. It's okay. But I'm with you. And he never loses yardage, and he catches the football. And another guy with a ton of steam. Another guy who's transferred up, Sacramento State. goes up and plays for Arizona State, and look what he did against Texas. It's just wild. So I'm with you. He's a guy that I'm really excited about as well. I had him in like the late second round, the first rookie mock draft I did, and I'm like, maybe that's going to end up being a little low when it comes to Scatabo. He's got a lot of factors that I think NFL teams are going to embrace.
Yep. Yeah. No, I really liked his tape, and it is tough when you have a guy that does not have the long speed. Like, you're not going to get the home run plays with him, but all of the other things that he does well, it's going to be pretty intriguing to NFL GMs.
And for me, the running back position, I'm completely with you. Ashton Genty is the 101 in all formats. We're going to end up taking him in the first round of redraft as well. And I think that when I see NFL mock drafts that have him going at like 20 or 21, I'm like, this is silly. This guy's going to end up getting drafted among the top 12 selections. I think the floor is like the Dallas Cowboys. There's going to be a couple teams ahead of him with Chicago, Jacksonville, the Raiders, that are all going to be attached to drafting Ashton Genty and just building their offense around him. He's a can't miss type guy, similar to Bijan Robinson years ago, a guy that we're just like, you don't really need to do too much evaluation here. Just pop the tape in, watch him play like an entire game, and you're like, okay, I get it. He's awesome. For me, the number 2 back is Omarion Hampton. I think he's every bit 220. He's about 6 feet tall, about 220. This is sort of a theme for the class, a back who can handle volume. Omarion Hampton is also a plus receiver at that size, sort of in the sense of like a Javonte Williams level receiver, or better at the next level. He had nearly 40 receptions this year, set the UNC record for combined yards in a season, and the production got better when Drake May left. So it wasn't like hey, this offense is great because of the great quarterback. Omarion Hampton stepped his game up. For me, it's just the track background, the size. This is a guy that NFL teams are going to love. 3 for me is Kaleb Johnson. Talked about him a little bit with you earlier. This is a guy who's also every bit 220, elite production, 10 games of 100 yards or more. Huge improvements this year as a player as well. You had that strong freshman season, injuries year 2, and then this year just ran away with it. Over 20 rushing scores in the Big Ten. And then for me, Henderson and Judkins are like neck and neck, but Judkins to me slots in as RB4, much like Hampton, much like Johnson. He has that elite size. He's going to be 215 plus, second most rushing yards all time in SEC history as a freshman, behind only Herschel Walker. I think people were starting to overthink this one, where they're like, not as excited about Judkins as they should have been. Then the national title game was like a reminder that like, hey, this guy is awesome. And the other thing now they're starting to do is poke holes in his speed. This guy is not going to be a 4.45 guy, but he's going to be every bit a 4.5 guy. Like, this is a plus athlete. There's nothing really more to say. He's a stud. And then TreVeyon Henderson. Last year, when I first did my rankings, I had him as the RB1 last year. So just to show you like the strength of this year versus last year's running back class, I had TreVeyon Henderson ahead of Jonathan Brooks, ahead of a pre-NFL draft Braylon Allen I was very high on. And of course, we had to adjust him because he was a day 3 guy. But I had TreVeyon ahead of both of those guys. Henderson had the most yards per carry in the Big Ten, I believe, in the last like 6 years. So in a committee backfield, like, people like to say bringing in Judkins was like a bad thing, where it showed that Ohio State didn't fully trust him to stay healthy and all that. I think it's to the contrary. They added the best player they could have in the portal. It obviously worked. They won a national title. But Henderson thriving in a committee, that might end up being what he is in the NFL, where he's a guy who gets like the 20th most carries among all running backs, but he can give you RB1 production. There's a number of those guys in fantasy where they're not your old school bell cows, but they're guys who can combine high value touches, explosiveness, receiving ability. Henderson sort of has it all. So my rankings, that's my guys 1 through 5. And I'll add a little asterisk that I'm totally willing to move running backs 2 through 5 around. And I think I like all of them. They're all going to be highly drafted in my overall rankings. So that's where I'm at. And then my running back that if I had to push him up into the top 5, I think Dylan Sampson's really, really good. And I think Dylan Sampson's a guy that's going to get more and more momentum as we go along. Like Henderson in the sense, maybe even smaller. Sampson might be sub 200 when it comes down to it. I think a lot of people think that he'll get to 200 pounds, but he's like a James Cook size guy. He'll be like a 198, 199. Maybe he'll come in like 201, but he's really, really good, really, really explosive. And I think he's the kind of guy that's going to come in and also be a day 2 selection that we're with juice. Younger as well. Sampson's also 20 years old. So that would be the one that I kind of wish I could squeeze in. What are your wide receiver rankings at this point, Garrett?
Yeah, and you and I talked beforehand. We're going to leave Travis Hunter out of this because we're pretty sure that corner is going to be at least part of the equation for him, if not the main part of the equation. I remember a few weeks back, it was, I want to say Jay Glazer interviewed like 15 NFL GMs, and 14 of them said that they would primarily want him to focus on defense. So it sounds like that's kind of the way the NFL is leaning. But so for this exercise, I'm not going to put him in there. If he was in there, he would be an argument at 1 or 2 for me. But without him there, I think it's Ted McMillan at 1 for me. And then he's kind of in a little bit of his own tier at 1. And then at 2, I could go either way. Right now, I have a Emeka Egbuka at 2 and Luther Burden at 3. I could easily see me flipping those guys. Very, very close at the position. But that's how I have that now. At 4, I have Trey Harris out of Ole Miss. Big play guy. He's got the size. His numbers are really good despite missing some games. And then I have Matthew Golden as my wide receiver 5 in the class. I know preseason there was a lot of Isaiah Bond, but I think Golden is really the guy that you want from the Texas wide receiver core.
Yeah, Golden's awesome. And I agree with you. I think actually Bond might get drafted ahead of him, but for fantasy football, Golden's the one who we're going to be more excited about. And it's all relative. If he's drafted ahead of him, it's not going to be like overwhelmingly ahead of him. I just think Bond's going to be a guy who comes in, runs a super fast 40 time. So I'm with you with Travis Hunter. If we were ranking Travis Hunter, I'd have him right up at 1 or 2. I think he'd be an awesome wide receiver in the league. But hey, do the right thing, Travis Hunter. Tell everybody you want to just play wide receiver, and then we can rank you appropriately. But let's leave him out of here for this purpose. For me, Ted McMillan, I'm going to be extremely high on Ted McMillan, stud. Luther Burden, I rank 2nd, and I could have put Egbuka at 2nd, but for me, Burden, I think, is going to have higher draft capital. I think he's got incredible elusiveness and explosiveness with the ball in his hands. And I think that there's a chance that if he lands correctly, he's going to be featured in somewhat of like somewhere between like a Deebo Samuel, DJ Moore. And I know he slipped this year in production, which we don't want to see, but I think this is a guy that NFL teams are going to really like. Then Egbuka at 3 is about as safe as it gets. If you want to go into your Dynasty rookie draft and get a guy who's not going to bust as a pro and going to be a very successful NFL player that could potentially be on your roster for 5-6 years, just take Egbuka. Power slot. His game translates. He's been ready for the NFL for years. High-level player. Also, I think will be a first-round NFL draft pick. 4 for me is Elick Ayamaner from Stanford. And this is a guy where I'm going to be higher on him relative to a lot of other people doing ranks. But this is a guy with, I think, elite skills in terms of athleticism, in terms of size. He's going to be every bit 6'2", about 210. And some of the highlight reel grabs are just silly. He's also a guy that he's played for a pretty terrible team the last 2 seasons, but it's not just the Colorado game where he burned Hunter and put up that insane production in that game. There's been several games like that where he just makes wow plays, and I think the prototypical size, I actually think that he's going to end up getting the NFL draft capital as well. He's a guy that I think will rise up in the Senior Bowl and also do very well at the draft combine. Also a Canadian player. So this guy goes Canada, Stanford, NFL. Weird route as a wide receiver in terms of getting there. But once he's there, I think he's going to be a very, very fantasy-friendly wideout. And then I'm with you. I have Golden at wide receiver 5, another guy who's really rising up throughout the process. And like we talked about with Howard, Golden helped himself a lot in the playoffs, was just tremendous against Arizona State, also helped himself out. SEC championship game was about as good as you get against that Georgia secondary. So that's my top 5. I think we're pretty close to one another on that. So
just different fours. That was it, really.
Yeah, there you go. Tight end. I'll start out with tight end, and I'll say check out Dynasty Nerds. Garret is crushing it. You guys do a tremendous amount of content, but tight end's the one position that you're still diving into. So I'll go first. I'll take that off your shoulders, even though you're the guest. Tight end 1 for me, Tyler Warren. I love Tyler Warren. You brought up earlier how there's no Brock Bowers in this class, and I agree with you. There's no Brock Bowers in this class, but this could be like a TJ Hawkinson level fantasy asset. A set it and forget it tight end. And I do think there's going to be, despite the fact that we don't have a Bowers, the fact that we've had Sam Laporta, Brock Bowers, and then this past year had 2 younger tight ends with 110 plus receptions each. The NFL is going to look at the tight end position and be more willing to throw a big role at a younger player than they would have like 5-6 years ago. So I think these Tyler Warren types, even though he's not Brock Bowers, there are teams who say we could use him like Brock Bowers. And I think Tyler Warren gives us immediate tight end 1 potential as a rookie. He's got the size, not a whole lot to dislike here. Elite producer. Number 2 for me, Colston Loveland. I think he's also going to get elite draft capital. He's got that size that compares to guys like Laporta, compares to guys like McBride. He's going to be like that 6'4", 248, and can run type profile. Did it all this year for Michigan on a bad offense, led them in every category, nearly led the national title team in receptions as well. Almost got Roman Wilson there. He had like 3 fewer receptions. 3 for me, Harold Fannin Jr., which I'm really excited about. This is a guy from your home state, ends up in the MAC and put up ridiculous numbers. 150 targets, 117 receptions. He had over 1,500 receiving yards, completely tore up his 2 opportunities this year to go up against higher level competition. He ripped up Penn State. He ripped up Texas A&M. And I think this is a guy where he's your classic move tight end. The other guys are going to be more capable of blocking at the NFL level. Fannin Jr., we want to see him land well on a team that just uses him as a receiver, sort of an overgrown wide receiver. 4 for me, Mason Taylor. He's going to get the draft capital. He's got the NFL lineage. Maybe not quite as, it's for me a teardrop in terms of instant fantasy viability from Fannin Jr. down to Taylor. And then a player at number 5 for me that I actually think has very interesting potential in fantasy and is very much a sleeper right now in this class. Gunnar Helm does some great things with his yak ability. He's got great size. This is a guy where it comes in after Jatavian Sanders was drafted with the number 1 pick in the 4th round. I think Helm gets drafted earlier than him by like 25 spots. I think he'll be a 3rd round pick, maybe sneaks into the 2nd, also headed to the Senior Bowl. This is a guy who's kind of nasty. He had a stiff arm on downs against your Buckeyes that even though it was against your Buckeyes, you had to smile a little bit and say, okay, that was a real stiff arm right there. So Gunnar Helm is my number 5 tight end. Your initial tight end leans.
Yeah. So right now, if I had to do it today, I have Tyler Warren at 1. I think he's pretty much a slam dunk. At 2, I have Colston Loveland out of Michigan. Everything that he did this past year, despite not really having good quarterback play, I think was really, really impressive. So Colston Loveland at 2. At 3, I have Gunnar Helm. So I'm with you there. I like Gunnar Helm. I think he's a very talented player and like his skill set. At 4, I have Harold Fannin from Bowling Green. And then at 5, a guy that I don't think you said, I have Terrence Ferguson from Oregon.
Another big tight end who's going to be down in Mobile as well at the Senior Bowl. Interested to see him as well. Garret, let everybody know where they can find your work.
Yeah, you can find me over at dynastynerds.com, on X or on Twitter at Dynasty Price. And yeah, all my work is with Dynasty Nerds. We've got the podcast, we've got all the YouTube, TikTok, all that good stuff going on. You can find us at dynastynerds.com.
And we're going to have Garret back here on Dynasty Life sometime this offseason. You always crush it. Highly recommend all of your work over at Dynasty Nerds. Dynasty Life, we're going to be dropping another one with Jagger May coming up. We're doing these as often as possible. I'm going to take a few days off when I go down to Mobile, and then we'll do some post-Senior Bowl content as well. We'll see you soon.
Hey, I want to thank you for being part of this broadcast. If you have any thoughts on it, leave a comment. If you enjoyed it, make sure you leave a like. And if you want to see more shows on the Player Profiler channel, subscribe to it. That's how we know you want more.